classic, The Phantom Menace, the first Star Wars movie in the prequel trilogy. This movie is amazing in every single way. Now I could see some prequel haters in the comments going, oh, but this movie sucks. The main lead sucks. He doesn't talk at all. He dies like a punk. Jar Jar's annoying. Ugly CGI. Jar Jar sucks. I'm gonna stop you there. Because this movie is really good. And deserves a lot more credit since the sequel trilogy really sucks. Like, hardcore sucks. So, why don't we begin with the movie? So, the crawl opens up with basically describing the circumstances of the Phantom Menace. Basically saying that the Trade Federation is putting a blockade out to the galaxy and needs the Queen to sign a treaty as the two Jedi Knights, Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan. This is not exactly what the crawl says, but it basically says it. Here's the actual crawl itself. Put audio of the crawl on. And people complain about this crawl for some reason, saying it's too boring, but it's not really that boring. That's the thing. I think prequel haters, or at least most of them, have a very short attention span. It's like, oh, it's not simple, so that means it sucks. Which is a problem, because simple doesn't always mean good. Look at the sequel trilogy, for example. The dead speak. My point. But anyway, we see the Republic ship go in, and they are talking to Newt Gunray, and he says that the blockade is perfectly legal. They go in, and we get to meet the two Jedis of the movie, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn. And, of course, Qui-Gon Jinn is played by the legend Liam Neeson. And then also, Obi-Wan in this movie is played by Ian McGregor. Some classic casting, alright. Obi-Wan is concerned that something bad's going to happen, but Qui-Gon Jinn says he senses nothing. And then we go to the Trade Federation members discussing with the droid, which the droid tells them that they are Jedi Knights, and they're here to force us to sign a treaty to end the blockade. So they contact the main villain of the movie, or at least one of them, Darth Sidious, to explain the circumstances, which Sidious just says to kill them immediately. They try to gas out the Jedi, and then also have the droids kill them, but of course that fails. They escape that area. They try going into the Trade Federation's main hangar, but are stopped by droidicas, which I love these droids. I really do like them. They're so cool, and the sound effects, the visuals in this movie, for the most part, are really good for 1999. Sadly enough, it might be on par with CGI nowadays. Well, unless you count the sequel trilogy, then that's a downgrade. But then, the Trade Federation loses the Jedi, and the Jedi's Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan sneak on to one of the droid vehicles to escape from the droids and go to the next planet to warn Naboo about the coming invasion, which also the Trade Federation blocks the communications with Naboo to the Republic because they know that this whole thing is illegal and wasn't approved by the Republic. And also, Palpatine needs this treaty to be signed for his goals to be complete. But anyway, continuing on, The droids eventually arrive on Naboo, which also the Jedi do as well. And then, as the droids are slowly invading the planet, we get to meet another lead in this movie. Or, not exactly a lead, but he's a character in it. And that is Jar Jar Binks, the most controversial figure in the Star Wars fan base. Or at least at that time. Now that title goes to characters like Rey, Reva, Rose Taco. Oh, and sequel defenders? Yes, I know it's Rose Tico. I'm just doing it to piss people off. And Holdo. But anyway, now knowing with all these bad characters and how time has changed, I'm gonna say it. Anomaly Inc. has already said it, but I'm gonna say it. Jar Jar isn't that bad. Okay, prequel haters, put down your weapons. Thank you. But anyway, Jar Jar insists that he needs to stay with Qui-Gon Jinn because of an oath that their people follow, basically saying that since he saved Jar Jar, he owes him a life debt. After they deal with the droids attacking Qui-Gon and Jar Jar immediately, Obi-Wan meets with Qui-Gon and Jar Jar mentions that the safest place in Naboo to hide is the underwater city, but he can't take him there because they banished him for being clumsy. And Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan convince him to change his mind and go anyway because of the droids that are going to destroy them. As Obi-Wan said, they're going to find us, crush us, and then blast us to oblivion. So then Jar Jar leads them to a pond or river. I think a lake maybe. I'm not great with water terms. Like huge bodies of water. I'm not good with that. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan and Jar Jar go to the underwater city, and man, this place looks good. Especially seeing it at the theater. Yes, I got to see The Phantom Menace for its 25th anniversary by the time I was recording this, before the anniversary came out, and it was awesome to see this. Personally, if it wasn't for watering damaging electronics, I personally wouldn't mind living here. But I think we're getting off topic. So then Jar Jar and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan enter the village, where Jar Jar is immediately arrested by the Gungans after he's been in there for like, I'd say a couple seconds. And we get to meet another character, Nas Boss. Which, funny enough, me and Gollum, Gollum, I forgot his nickname. Gollum's the nickname that I gave to a friend of mine who supports this channel. We basically do the Nas Boss sound, the iconic one, yeah. It's silly, but that's what we do. Who cares if it's silly? We have fun. Who cares? Nas Boss, after some convincing, gives Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan a ship to get out of Gungan City to go find Naboo. But then Qui-Gon tells Nas Boss that Jar Jar owes him a life debt and he needs to repay it. And Nas Boss decides to release Jar Jar and gives Jar Jar to Qui-Gon Jinn, and they're off to save Naboo. We then transition to the Jedi and Jar Jar in their transportation going through the sea. And Obi-Wan asks Jar Jar why he was particularly banished from the Gungan city, and he said mostly because he was clumsy. But then we see this big fish grab the ship, and Jar Jar is the one mostly freaking out, and they're being carried by the fish. But then we get a bigger fish that eats the other fish, and they manage to escape from the fish that had them before. I know that sounds like a mouthful. Anyway, then we transition back to the Trade Federation
which they are in contact with Palpatine, and Palpatine says that eventually they're going to accept the control of the Trade Federation, where one of the Neimoidians says that Amidala is going to hope that the Republic's on her side, but Palpatine says that she's young and naive and very easily to manipulate. Then Palpatine ends communications, the two Neimoidians, and one of them's like, you didn't report the two Jedi who escaped, and the other one's like, no need to report them when there's nothing to report. Then we transition back to Naboo, and Jar Jar, Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan are still in the sea cruiser, where they eventually enter in a cave, but then the power starts shutting off as they get deeper into the cave. Obi-Wan's trying to fiddle with the power, like messing with the wires, and Jar Jar's just panicking because of the power being off and not knowing where they are. Then Obi-Wan fixed the power and says the power's back on. Then there's this gigantic fish, and they begin to drive away from the fish, but at the same time there's another big fish that they swerve up from getting eaten, and then the fish that was chasing them gets eaten again, mouthful, and then Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Jar Jar head to another cave. Then we transition to Naboo again, where the droid army is invading the planet of Naboo, and the Trade Federation basically has control of the place. Then we transition to Qui-Gon Jinn, Jar Jar, and Obi-Wan arriving to the surface of Naboo, and then we transition to the Neimoidians and the droids transferring the queen and her subjects, being sent to one of the camps for the Trade Federation. Funny enough, before this scene takes place, in the same scene that Jar Jar, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon Jinn arrive on the surface, there was a deleted scene of this movie where the transport they went to after they got out of it, except for Jar Jar, began to go backwards, and after they saved Jar Jar from the ship going backwards, the ship falls off the edge. Probably not the most interesting, but I found it interesting. And part of me is mixed on it. Like, part of me is like, they should have kept this, but part of me is like, I can see why it got cut as well. I just thought it would be a fun thing to throw out there. Anyway, the droids begin to transfer the queen and her subjects to one of the camps, where at the same time we see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn exploring the area of Naboo, and they see that the droids have them, where then the Jedi jump down and cut all the droids down. The Jedi tell them to follow them, and one of the senators like, it looks like the treaty failed, and Qui-Gon's like, the treaty never took place, and asks if their shuttles that they have, because their communications is down because of the Trade Federation. So the captain directs them to where the hangar bay is, and there are too many droids around. They have all the pilots surrounded with battle droids, and Qui-Gon's like, we need to get you off this planet, Queen, and get you to Coruscant. And she's like, I'm going to stay with my people. But then Qui-Gon's like, you'll die if you stay. But then the captain and one of the senators, or one of the Queen's aides, says that they wouldn't dare because they need a treaty signed. And Qui-Gon says that there's probably more to this, because it seems weird for the Neimoidians to do this. So they begin to walk towards the ship, where it's guarded by the droids, and Obi-Wan is set to set all the pilots free. And we get a funny moment where the droids are asking where they're taking the Jedi specifically, and Qui-Gon's like, to Coruscant, and droid's like, that does not compute. I mean, you're under arrest. Where Qui-Gon immediately cuts the droids down, and Obi-Wan also cuts down the droids that are surrounding the pilots, and they begin to run to the Naboo starfighter, and they begin to take off. We go into space, and the Trade Federation is trying to shoot down the starfighter, and Obi-Wan puts Jar Jar with the astromech droids. But once the ship sustains damage, the astromech droids begin to go outside of the ship to try to fix the repair. Most of them are shot off by the Trade Federation. Yes, prequel haters. There's a difference between the Trade Federation and the Separatists. But I could see someone saying, but the Neimoidians were in Separatist alliance. And yes, you are right, they were. But the Separatists weren't formed until after the Trade Federation had fallen. They were formed after the events of Phantom Menace. But anyway, continuing on, one of the astromechs repairs it, and we all know which one. It's the legend himself, R2-D2. Repairs the damage, and they escape from the blockade. But then, once we get back to the inside of the ship, the Queen asks what the droid's name is, and it turns out it's R2-D2, and the Queen says to commemorate this droid and get him cleaned up. Then we transition to the Trade Federation, where they explain the current situation, that they lost the Queen, but then Palpatine is not mad, surprisingly, and reveals his secret apprentice and one of the best Sith Lords in the Star Wars saga. I don't care what whiny prequel haters say, and that is Darth Maul. Darth Maul puts an intimidation on them, and the Neimoidians also say, now that there are two of them. Anyway, then we go back to the ship where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are like, we need to go to another planet because the hyperdrive was destroyed, or damaged, I should say, and they need a place to lay low, and they say Tatooine is probably the closest planet, and the Royal Guard's like, what if the Neimoidians are there? And Qui-Gon's like, they're not, it's run by the Hutts, and one of the people's like, the Hutts are gangsters. They can't be trusted by the Queen. And Qui-Gon says it's better the Hutts than it is with the Neimoidians. So they go to Tatooine. Padme has a conversation with Jar Jar, explaining how Jar Jar managed to get with the crew of the movie. But then they land on Tatooine, and they go into this shop, where then we meet one of the best characters in this movie, Watto, and also get to meet the main character of the entire saga, Anakin Skywalker, as a young little boy. Says that he's looking for a warp drive to go into hyperspace for a particular model, and outside Watto's like, what can you pay me? And Qui-Gon basically says that he has Republic credits, and Watto's like, oh, no, that won't work here. Qui-Gon tries using his Jedi mind trick, but it doesn't work on Watto. And Watto's like, oh, do you think you're some sort of Jedi waving your hand like that? That doesn't work with me, only money. And tells him to get lost. And Qui-Gon and Padme and Jar Jar leave to go figure out a way to get the money. And of course, then Watto lets Anakin go off for the day after doing a task because there's nothing really needed. And then we transition to Tatooine, where we see the epic live action appearance of Darth Maul, like out of the hologram, and he is looking for the Queen so she can sign the treaty. Then we go back and Jar Jar has managed to get himself in trouble in the village, and we get to meet another alien named Saboba, who is a particular alien species in the Star Wars franchise called Doug. Yes, that's his actual species. I looked it up. And Anakin butts in and saves Jar Jar by basically talking smack about him, about the pod race. And Saboba leaves, and Anakin says that Jar Jar almost became a puddle, and Qui-Gon appreciates that. And they're heading back towards the ship, but there's a sandstorm coming. And also in the background, apparently in the expanded universe, I think this is Quinlan Voss. One of the people in the background is Jedi Master Quinlan Voss, who is undercover. I'm pretty sure also in the expanded universe, Quinlan said he didn't know that Qui-Gon needed help and would have gladly helped him if he could. But I'm getting off topic. So Anakin brings them to his place where to avoid the sandstorm and basically have dinner with them. And they're talking about how he can get money. Anakin offers to go in the pod race and say it's Qui-Gon Jinn's pod race. And then we also find out that Qui-Gon Jinn also had seen a pod race on a different planet. I can't remember which one he said. So it's a nice detail knowing that other planets do pod races. And Anakin's mom is against the concept, but then once Padme asked if there's anyone who would be willing to help the Republic, and she says no, and says that Anakin doing this is the way, is possible. Oh, and also earlier, Anakin showed Padme C-3PO, and we get the joke that R2-D2 calls C-3PO naked, which honestly I find this pretty funny. Then we transition to Qui-Gon Jinn going with Jar Jar and Padme to Watto's workshop, where Watto then says, I see that you're nominating a boy to race your pod, and how are you going to pay the fee, because Republic credits certainly won't do. And Qui-Gon says that he would offer the ship as payment. And then we transition to Anakin working on his pod racer. And we get interesting details from Shmi Skywalker while he's working on the ship. Qui-Gon asked who the father was, and he finds out the detail that he had no father and was just born. And Qui-Gon is intrigued by this detail. Eventually, Anakin gets the pod to work, and then we transition to night, where Qui-Gon Jinn does a test with Anakin and plucks some of his blood and detects that he has a very high midichlorian count, which no prequel haters, midichlorians are not the Force. It's a microorganism that ties you to the Force, and basically the higher the midichlorian count, the more powerful you will be to the Force. It's not the Force itself. It's just a way of the Force and the Jedi basically having power. It's not the same thing. But anyway, Obi-Wan is confused by this information, says, "Do we really need another useless life form?" Obviously referencing Jar Jar. And then we transition to morning, where the pod race is about to begin. And we do the whole pod race scene. It's a really cool sequence. It's like one of the few scenes, for the most part, that prequel haters actually like. And I can understand why. There's a few prequel haters that hate this scene, but granted, prequel haters, for the most part, are not very bright people. They just come up with stupid arguments like, "Oh, Yoda should have a lightsaber," even though he's a Jedi. So, yeah, prequel haters, never trust them, especially nowadays since the sequels exist, which is the worst Star Wars in existence. But anyway, we will get to the sequels when we get to the sequels. So we go through the pod race, and at the end of the pod race, Anakin won. And also, Watto and Qui-Gon Jinn did a bargain that if he wins the race, he gets to keep Anakin and take him with him. But unfortunately, the original plan was to take Shmi and Anakin, but Watto was like, "No, only one slave. It's not worth two slaves." And Qui-Gon basically tells him to pack his stuff, but Anakin hesitates to leave because he doesn't want to leave his mom. And he also meets up with 3PO saying that, "I'm sorry that I couldn't finish you, but I'm going now to become a Jedi." And also, he'll try to convince his mom not to sell him for a quick buck or anything like that. Anakin heads off, says goodbye to his mom one last time, and then heads toward the ship. And then we transition to Anakin and Qui-Gon running to the ship, where Qui-Gon is immediately engaged by Darth Maul. Now, an interesting deleted scene from this movie was one of Maul's probe droids from earlier was following Qui-Gon and Anakin before this scene. And Qui-Gon was like, "Someone's following us, we need to hurry." Which explains why they're running. I honestly wish they didn't cut the scene. This scene's only like a few seconds. I know it probably could have lived without it, but it would have gave such more context at the same time. But oh well, what do you do? So Anakin manages to sneak on the ship. Qui-Gon and Darth Maul are continuing to fight until Obi-Wan swoops on by with the ship and picks up Qui-Gon. And Qui-Gon introduces Obi-Wan to Anakin, and then they take off and head for the planet of Coruscant. And then we go to Naboo, where one of the politicians of Naboo and one of the Neimoidians, I can't remember his name. Actually, let's look up his name so I don't look like a complete idiot. And some people are going to call me an idiot anyway, but oh well. Let's just find the name. It's Newt Gunray. I wasn't sure if it was Newt Gunray, but I just wanted to check. So Newt Gunray basically sends the senator off because the senator is like, "We oppose you because of democracy." And one of the droids comes in and says, "We are in search of the secret underwater villages, and they won't be hiding for long." Where we transition back to the ship, where Padme is watching the message of the senator guy we just saw. And she then talks to Anakin, and Anakin is cold because he's not used to the temperatures of space. And then we land on the planet of Coruscant, where we meet Senator Palpatine and current Chancellor Valorum. And Anakin goes with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to go with the Jedi. And then also the senator is going with the politicians. Where we go to next is the Queen of Naboo is like, "We need to go back for my people." And Senator Palpatine is like, the Republic is not going to do that. But if you vote for no confidence and demand new leadership, from Chancellor Valorum, they could possibly change their minds on the issue. And the Queen's like, I have no time for that. And then we transition to the Jedi Council, where Qui-Gon reports that there is a Sith Lord, or the possibility of the return of the Sith Lord, or the Sith, I should say. And Mundi is like, the Sith have been extinct for millennia, even though in the Acolyte he's aware of this Sith Lord, but who cares about the Acolyte? That garbage isn't canon to Star Wars. Real Star Wars, Mundi is not an idiot, and if something like that did happen, he would have said, we haven't seen the Sith in like 85 years ago, or something like that. But yeah, that's garbage Disney canon, Mundi. We don't count him. Get that garbage out of here. Anyway, and also, Qui-Gon reports that he might have found the Chosen One from the Great Prophecy, the one who is to bring balance to the Force. And then, at some point, Anakin meets up with the Queen, where Anakin says to say goodbye to Padme for her, because she's probably not going to see him again once he becomes a Jedi. Then we transition to this court scene that every prequel hater, some reason, complains about, even though it is only 2 minutes, you whiny babies. 2 minutes, wow, so painful. It's not like 5 hours, it's only 2 minutes. You babies can get over it. But anyway, they start doing their political meeting where the Nymoidians of the Senate are like, I object, there's no proof to this. And, of course, this corruption, or this witness to politics being garbage, because politics in general is just a bad thing. Politicians are bad people, no matter what side they're on. Politicians are scum, which I actually very much like that the prequels implemented this. Unlike the sequels, where they just like, oh, one side bad, one side good. Vote for this side in the next election. But I'm glad they took this direction in the prequels. But anyway, the Queen is then convinced by Palpatine to question the leadership of Chancellor Valorum, and says she wants a vote of no confidence to get a new chancellor in there. And then we transition to Anakin taking a test from the Jedi, where he's using the Force to see what is on the screen for his test. And then the Jedi Masters after this are like, we are not going to accept training for the boy, where Qui-Gon Jinn is a little upset by this, and then decides to take Anakin as his apprentice. And Obi-Wan is questioning him and saying, don't question the council, but at the same time he wants to be knighted because he is ready. This kind of builds questions into the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, because Qui-Gon is this guy who believes that we should do the will of the Force and not this political thing. And then the Queen decides that they're heading back. Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Jar Jar are all heading to Naboo, which then we transition back to Naboo, where they're trying to get the help of the Gungans. But of course, the Gungans are evacuated from the village, and Jar Jar shows them their secret hiding place, just in case. And the Gungans and the Naboo people discuss and try to figure out a way to work together, where Padme reveals that she is the queen of Naboo, and with convincing, they work together to plan to take down the Trade Federation. And also, Nest Boss puts Jar Jar as a general to lead the charge against the Neimoidians and their droids. And meanwhile, while the Gungans are fighting the droids, Padme, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and the other people, and Anakin are going up against the droids at the temple to try to end the negotiation of the blockade and save the day. The final act of the movie goes back and forth between the Gungan fight and then also the raid on the capital, where eventually the raid of the capital is then interrupted for a bit because then Darth Maul appears and we get this epic opening shot of the doors opening and Darth Maul being right there, where the others say that we'll take the long way, and then we get to witness the beginning of one of the best duels in Star Wars history, in my opinion, Duel of the Fates. We get to see this awesome lightsaber clash, and it is so good to see these amazing lightsaber fights. I am glad that George Lucas took it to improve the lightsaber fights from the last movie, or the original trilogy, I should say, because the fights in the original trilogy, mostly in New Hope, is the worst of the of the saga. New Hope's fight between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan is bad, but the fights after that is amazing. And again, we go back and forth between the Gungan fight and the Duel of the Fates, and then also the raid, which, let's go to the Duel of Fates part. They fight a bunch, they eventually hit a ray shield, and then Qui-Gon dies after the ray shield's down and killed by Darth Maul. And then after the ray shield goes back up, Obi-Wan and Darth Maul have it out, where then Maul overpowers Obi-Wan, but then Obi-Wan defeats Darth Maul and leads him down to a tube where he is dead. Well, for now at least. We'll get back to that eventually. But anyway, then we go to the the Gungan fight, where they're fighting the droids and they have an advantage for a bit, but then they lose their advantage. And then the people who split off from Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan go to deal with the invasion of the capital, and they manage to end the threat of the Neimoidians. And then also, I forgot this key detail, Anakin also goes into space with the help with R2-D2, taking the helm of the ship and destroy the droid control center in space, and the droids are deactivated by that action, and Qui-Gon is then returned to Coruscant, where they are prepping a funeral for Qui-Gon Jinn, but Obi-Wan wants to be the one to train Anakin because it was Qui-Gon's dying word, and he wants to fulfill that word. Then we have the funeral of Qui-Gon Jinn, and then we get the ending of The Phantom Menace with a parade, and finally the galaxy being at peace again, and that is the end of the amazing Phantom Menace. This movie was really good. It was especially awesome when I got to see this in theaters for the 25th anniversary of this movie. I loved it. And I would also like to thank my subscriber, Nick, for telling me in a live stream that The Phantom Menace was going to be re-releasing in theaters for the occasion of the 25th anniversary. I thank you so much, Nick. I really did enjoy it. And it was especially nice bringing a friend of mine to the theater as well, because he hadn't seen the film in forever, and he had a great time. So this movie is awesome. I would give it an 8 out of 10. This movie definitely gets too much hate, But thanks to the failure of Disney's Star Wars, the prequels are getting a bit of a resurgence. They're getting more credit that they deserved. The credit that they should have gotten in the first place, but the early days of the internet ruined that. Because this movie is not bad. Is it the greatest Star Wars movie? Probably not, but it still has a good story. The characters are interesting, and also, to answer your question, Mr. Plinkett, Qui-Gon Jinn is the main character of The Phantom Menace. So, that's about it. I am so glad I got to see this. I hope you guys enjoyed this review of The Phantom Menace. Sorry this review was late. I've had a lot of pushback lately. So it's nice to get this review finally out for you guys to see, if it's not already a year past the re-release of The Phantom Menace for its 25th anniversary. But anyway, this is D to the B signing off, and have a nice day, everyone.